So here we are, the penultimate chapter of the story, as we look at the final days of Paul. I want you to imagine with me that we're together at a funeral, Paul's funeral. And we've been reminded that just days earlier, Paul met his death, beheaded at the hands of the Roman government. And so we're here to try and make sense of our own grief. We're here to try and make sense of why things ended this way. And we're here to pay tribute to the man that we knew Paul to be. Over the course of this service, we'll do the things we do at funerals. Maybe we'll stand together and sing one of Paul's favourite songs. We'll pray for one another. We'll pray for comfort. But then I want you to imagine that someone stands up to share something of a eulogy, to reflect on the life that Paul lived. Will you join me for that now? Paul has been described as a bald-headed, bow-legged man with a big nose and scruffy, thick eyebrows that meet in the middle. A body covered with scars. But those of us who know Paul, those of us who share in his story, God's story, we know Paul as so much more. During his life's work, Paul walked over 11,000 kilometres from major city to major city across the Roman world. Paul often spent the first part of his day making tents so that he could sell them to make ends meet, to pay the bills. But most of his time was spent talking about this new way of living, declaring the gospel, the good news of Jesus. Paul didn't always have it easy. You've read it before, but let me remind you what he wrote in that letter to his friends at Corinth. Remember what he said? He said, 5 times I received 39 lashes from the Jews. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a day and a night at sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from my fellow Jews, and danger from the Gentiles. In danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false believers. I have laboured and toiled, often going without sleep. I have known hunger, I've known thirst, often going without food. I have been cold and I've been naked. And yet, in spite of all that Paul suffered, he encouraged us to rejoice. Remember what he said? Rejoice in the Lord always. And he knew we'd have trouble getting our heads around it, so he said it again. Rejoice. When Paul wasn't making tents or talking about Jesus, in his spare time, he wrote letters. He wrote letters to the churches across the empire, encouraging them in their journey and their faith. 13 of those letters that Paul wrote are part of our Bibles today. Paul was a man who never got over the fact that the risen Jesus had met him, changed his life, and given him a job to do, to go make disciples. Can I say that one more time? Paul was a man that never got over the fact that the risen Jesus had met him, changed his life, and given him a job to do, to go make disciples. And so Paul became something of a spokesman for God's grace. In fact, when you read through his letters, it's like grace was his favourite word. Maybe that had something to do with his own life's experience, his own experience of grace. It seems that everywhere Paul went, he caused an uproar. Remember that time he arrived in Jerusalem? The whole city was aroused and the people came from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple and immediately the gates were shut. They were trying to kill him. Fortunately, news reached the Roman commander that the city was in an uproar. Anyway, you've all read about that. You know how the story goes. It's hard to imagine, isn't it, that such a man of God, a man so committed to the welfare of others, so committed to the good news of Jesus, should suffer such bad things. And yet he was following in the footsteps of Jesus. He lived an extraordinary life, somehow managing even through the darkest sorrows to choose to experience joy serving his Jesus. He experienced friendship and acceptance from a few, but most people rejected him. Even so, in the midst of a dark culture, Paul was a shining light. Even in the face of such dark opposition, Paul showed us what it looks like to endure to the end. We all have storms, troubles of some kind, relationship difficulties, financial problems, personal stuff to deal with. There's so much to learn, so much we can take from the teachings and the examples of Paul. One thing about Paul that stood out was that even whilst over the course of his life he shared with thousands of people, he intentionally found time to invest in the lives of individuals. Individuals like a young man named Timothy. Paul took the young Timothy under his wing, nurturing his faith. Paul knew his days were numbered, and his investment in Timothy was a demonstration of his passion that his work, the work of Jesus, needed to continue even after Paul's own death. From a cold, damp, dark Roman cell where Paul spent his last days, he wrote to his dear friend Timothy. In that letter he said, "I'm being poured out like a drink offering. The time of my death is close. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. Not only me, but to all those who have loved his appearing." Paul's life was changed, born again on the road to Damascus. His life came to an end on a chopping block in a Roman prison cell. But we know that Paul lives on. His life's work still impacts us this day. I said earlier that Paul was a man who never got over the fact that the risen Lord Jesus had met him, changed his life, and given him a job to do, to go make disciples. But Paul's job on earth is finished. Paul has fought the good fight. He's run his race well and finished. But what about us? Our race is still before us. It's not finished yet. Our fight is still to be fought. Jesus meets us. He changes our lives, and he gives us a job to do. What are you going to do with that?